My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 63 years old. For 32 years, I believed I had one of those quiet marriages people don't write books about. Not because it was perfect, because it survived. We survived layoffs. We survived miscarriages. We survived raising two children. We survived debt, cancer scares, empty nest syndrome, even my husband's heart surgery 7 years ago. Whenever people asked what the secret was, I'd smile and say, every marriage has storms. We just kept choosing each other. I believed that, with everything inside me. If someone had stopped me just 6 months ago and whispered, Evelyn, your husband is going to leave you for a woman younger than your own daughter, I would have laughed. Not because I trusted him blindly, because after 32 years, you stop imagining endings. You think you've already reached forever. In the morning, everything ended exactly like every other Tuesday. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, fed our old Labrador, Murphy, watering the roses Richard planted on our 10th anniversary. I remember looking at those roses, thinking they had bloomed beautifully this year. Funny. Sometimes life lets flowers bloom right before it burns the garden down. Richard came downstairs 20 minutes later. White polo shirt, khaki pants, phone already in his hand. He barely looked at me. Morning, morning. You have coffee? I just made it. He poured himself a cup. No kisses, no smile, nothing unusual. Looking back now, maybe that's what scares me most. Nothing felt wrong. Not yet. After breakfast, he said something strange. I'll be home early tonight. I smiled. Really? Yeah. Maybe we can finally watch that movie. He hesitated. Sure. Just 1 second. One tiny hesitation. Back then, it meant nothing. Now, it echoes louder than everything else. Around 4 that afternoon, I started making his favorite dinner: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, apple pie cooling on the counter. 32 years teaches you what comforts a man. I thought I was preparing a nice evening. Instead, I was preparing my own funeral. Not the kind with flowers, the kind where a life dies while the body keeps breathing. At exactly 6:17 p.m., I heard his truck pull into the driveway. Murphy wagged his tail. I wiped my hands on my apron, smiled. I walked toward the front door. Richard stepped inside carrying one suitcase, not luggage from a trip. Our old leather suitcase, the one we used for vacations. I frowned. Where are you going? He didn't answer. He set the suitcase beside the stairs. Then he looked around the house, like someone saying goodbye to a hotel room. Not a home, not our home. Something inside me shifted, just slightly. Richard? He took a long breath. We need to talk. Those 4 words, after 32 years. You know they never mean anything good. We sat in the living room. The pot roast stayed in the oven. The coffee table still held yesterday's newspaper. Murphy laid his head across Richard's feet. Even the dog didn't know his family was about to disappear. Richard rubbed his hands together. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I laughed nervously. What is this? You're scaring me. He looked away. I'm leaving. Silence. Not dramatic silence, not movie silence, real silence. The kind where your brain refuses to translate the words. I blinked. What? I'm leaving. For work? No. Then where? He inhaled slowly. I'm leaving this marriage. I stared at him. I honestly thought he was joking. 32 years. You don't just say those words. You don't. You fight, you cry, you argue, you go to counseling. You don't leave. I shook my head. No. Evelyn, no. We've grown apart. No. I'm serious. No. It was the only word my mouth knew anymore. No, 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 no. Finally, I whispered, Is there someone else? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. After 3 decades, you learn to hear confessions inside silence. I closed my eyes. How long? 8 months. 8 months. 8 months. He had been eating my dinners, sleeping beside me, celebrating anniversaries, holding my hand in church, while loving someone else. I felt physically sick. I stood and ran to the kitchen, made it halfway before vomiting into the sink. He followed me, Evelyn. I gripped the counter. Who is she? He hesitated, then quietly said, Her name is Ashley. Ashley. The name sounded so young. So, how old is Ashley? He didn't answer. I turned. How old? 32. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because madness sometimes sounds exactly like laughter. 32. She was the same age. As for our marriage had literally lasted longer than she'd been alive. You've lost your mind. I didn't plan this. You expect me to believe that? It just happened. I slammed my hand onto the counter. No, affairs don't just happen. They're built, they're protected, they're fed, they're chosen. Every single day. He looked down. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at him. After 32 years, that sentence felt almost insulting. What does she know about you? Does she know you snore? Does she know you're terrified of thunderstorms? Does she know you still call your sister every Sunday? Does she know your cholesterol medicine makes you dizzy? He stayed quiet. I stepped closer. I know every wrinkle on your face. I know every scar. I held your hand after surgery. I buried your parents beside you. I gave you 32 years. My voice cracked, and you gave another woman the future that belonged to me. Murphy began whining. He looked between us, confused. Richard reached for his leash. I'm taking Murphy. No. He'll approximately 2,800 to 3,200 words when narrated. When Richard walked out of our front door with that suitcase, the house didn't suddenly become quiet. It became unfamiliar. The silence wasn't empty. It was loud. Every room reminded me that someone who had occupied it for 32 years had simply vanished. I stood in the living room long after his truck disappeared. Murphy lay beside my feet, staring toward the front door. Every few minutes he'd lift his head, expecting Richard to walk back inside. I almost envied him. Dogs don't understand betrayal. I only understand waiting. I still hadn't touched the dinner. The pot roast was drying out in the oven. The mashed potatoes had gone cold. 2 plates were already sitting on the dining table. One for me, one for the man who had just told me another woman mattered more than 32 years of marriage. I walked over slowly, picked up his plate, then mine. I scraped every bit of food into the trash. By the time I finished, I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Not because of the meal, because for the first time in 32 years, I was cooking for one. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of our bed. No, my bed now. His side remained perfectly smooth. His pillow still smelled like his cologne. I picked it up without thinking, hold it against my chest, then threw it across the room. I hated myself for missing someone who had chosen to destroy me. But love doesn't disappear the moment respect does. Sometimes it lingers just long enough to make the pain unbearable. At 6 the next morning, my phone started ringing. It was our daughter, Rebecca. I stared at the screen. I couldn't answer. If I heard her voice, I'd break. The phone rang again, then again. Finally, I picked up. Mom? I tried to speak. Nothing came out. She immediately knew. Mom, what happened? I whispered. Your father left. Silence. What? He packed a suitcase. He left. There was another long silence. Then she asked the question every child asks first. Did you two argue? No. Did something happen? No. Then why? I closed my eyes. There's another woman. Rebecca gasped. No. Yes. No. I could hear her crying now. My dad wouldn't do that. I didn't answer. Because yesterday, I would have said the exact same thing. By noon, both of our children were at my house. Rebecca hugged me so tightly I thought I might fall apart inside her arms. Our son, Daniel, walked through the front door looking furious. Where is he? I don't know. I'm calling him. Daniel, no. He pulled out his phone. His father answered after 2 rings. What? Daniel exploded. What do you mean, what? What did you do? Richard sighed. This isn't your business. Daniel laughed bitterly. My parents' marriage isn't my business. You don't understand. I understand enough. You cheated on Mom. I didn't call to argue. You don't get to replace 32 years with some girl and expect us to smile. Richard stayed quiet, then finally said, I hope one day you'll understand. Daniel hung up before he finished. He looked at me. I don't have a father anymore. Those words hurt almost as much as Richard leaving, because betrayal doesn't only break a marriage, it fractures an entire family. 2 days later, the neighborhood knew. I never told anyone. I didn't have to. People notice moving trucks. People notice wedding rings disappearing. People notice when an older woman suddenly starts grocery shopping alone. Mrs. Jenkins from next door brought over a casserole. She hugged me without asking questions. Sometimes kindness hurts more than cruelty, because it reminds you how fragile you've become. 3 days after Richard left, I received divorce papers. 3 days. 32 years, reduced to a stack of legal documents. I sat at the kitchen table staring at them. The handwriting wasn't his. The lawyer's language sounded cold. Petitioner, respondent, marital assets, property division. It was amazing how paperwork could erase decades of memories. Our first apartment wasn't mentioned. The miscarriage wasn't mentioned. The nights we stayed awake with sick children weren't mentioned. None of it mattered, only signatures. Then I saw something that made my stomach turn. Richard wanted to sell the house, our house, the place where both of our children took their first steps, where birthdays happened, Christmas mornings, anniversary dinners. He wanted it sold immediately. I whispered, You've already erased me. That afternoon, Rebecca insisted I come stay with her. I don't want you alone. I smiled weakly. I'll be okay. No, you won't. I have to learn. She squeezed my hand. I hate him. I shook my head. Don't. Why not? Because he's still your father. She looked confused. After what he did? I nodded. I won't let his choices poison your heart. She cried harder. Mom, how are you protecting him after this? I looked toward the empty chair Richard used to sit in. I'm not protecting him. I'm protecting the part of myself that refuses to become bitter. That evening, curiosity finally defeated dignity. I searched Ashley's name online. It took less than 5 minutes. Her social media profile appeared instantly. Thousands of photos, perfect makeup, luxury restaurants, beach vacations, designer handbags, and then I found the picture. Richard, smiling, standing beside her, his arm around her waist. Caption, Life begins when you finally choose happiness. The photo had been posted 6 weeks before he left me. 6 weeks, meaning while he was still sleeping beside me, he was already introducing another woman to the world. I couldn't breathe. I stared at that photograph until my eyes blurred. She looked so young. Her skin is smooth, perfect teeth, a bright smile. I zoomed in on Richard's face. He looked happier than I'd seen him in years. That realization shattered something inside me. Had he been pretending with me all along? Or had I simply stopped seeing him? Then I noticed the comments. Beautiful couple. You two belong together. Finally found your soulmate. Soulmate. I almost laughed. Those strangers had no idea he already had a wife, a family, grandchildren, a whole life. They only knew the version he wanted them to see. I closed the app. I walked into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. Gray hair, wrinkles, soft skin around my neck, tired eyes. I touched my face gently. Was this what he stopped loving? Had I become invisible simply because I got older? I remembered every birthday he'd kissed my forehead, every time he'd called me beautiful, every anniversary. Had he been lying, or had he simply forgotten? That night, I made a terrible decision. I called him. He answered. Evelyn. I saw her. Silence. She's beautiful. He sighed. I didn't want this to hurt you. I laughed quietly. You didn't want it to hurt me? You replaced me with someone young enough to be our daughter. I never compared you. You didn't have to. The comparison was standing beside you in those photographs. He didn't answer. Finally, I asked, does she know you still owe money on the truck? Silence. Does she know your blood pressure medication makes you dizzy? Nothing. Does she know you cry during military movies? He whispered, stop. No. Does she know who stayed awake every night after your surgery? Evelyn. Does she know who gave up her career so you could build yours? His breathing became heavier. I said, stop. No. You don't get to erase 32 years because someone younger smiled at you. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said something that haunted me for weeks. I deserve to be happy. Click. He hung up. I sat there holding the phone, staring into nothing. One sentence, 7 words. I deserve to be happy, as if my unhappiness had become the price of his happiness, as if 32 years of loyalty had become an inconvenience, as if I had somehow become the villain, simply because I grew old beside the man I loved. That was the night I stopped praying for my marriage to come back. Instead, I started praying for the strength to survive without it. But I had no idea that Richard's new perfect life was already beginning to crack. And in just a few short weeks, the first person to knock on my door wouldn't be Richard. It would be someone who knew exactly who Ashley really was. Approximately 2,800 to 3,200 words when narrated. 3 weeks passed, not a single message from Richard. No apology, no explanation, no second thoughts, just silence. I had always imagined that if our marriage ever faced a serious crisis, we'd eventually sit down at the kitchen table and talk. 32 years deserved at least one honest conversation. Instead, our marriage ended with divorce papers and unanswered phone calls. The hardest part wasn't waking up alone anymore. It was realizing how quickly the world adjusts to your absence. Richard had already adjusted. The neighbors had stopped asking how I was doing. Even the grocery cashier who used to ask, "How's your husband?" had stopped mentioning his name. Life has a cruel way of moving forward, even when your heart refuses to. I tried to create a routine. Every morning, I'd make coffee, water the roses, walk Murphy through the neighborhood, read for an hour, cook dinner, go to bed, repeat. It looked like healing from the outside. Inside, I was surviving minute by minute. Sometimes I'd find myself setting out 2 coffee mugs before catching myself. Other times I'd hear a truck outside and instinctively glance toward the driveway. Then I'd remember. Richard wasn't coming home. Rebecca visited almost every weekend. She'd bring groceries I hadn't asked for, flowers I didn't need, conversations neither of us really wanted to have. She kept trying to convince me to sell the house before the divorce forced me to. Mom, maybe it's time for a fresh start. I looked around the living room. The walls still held family photographs. The grandfather clock Richard inherited from his father still ticked every second. This house isn't hurting me. What is? The memories. She nodded quietly. There wasn't a house in the world big enough to escape those. One rainy Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved. I almost ignored it. Something told me to answer. Hello? There was a long pause. Then a woman's voice. Mrs. Carter. Yes. My name is Melissa. I don't know if you remember me. I searched my memory. Nothing. I'm sorry. I work at Harrison Financial. My stomach tightened. That was Richard's company. I was his executive assistant. I sat down immediately. What happened? He doesn't know I'm calling. I know. She hesitated. I think there are things you deserve to know. My heartbeat became louder. What things? Another pause. Your husband didn't meet Ashley 8 months ago. I frowned. What do you mean? They've been together almost 2 years. I stopped breathing. No. I'm sorry. No, he lied. I know. 2 years, not 8 months. 2 years. That meant every anniversary dinner, every Christmas, every family vacation, every birthday, every church service, every holiday photograph, every single one had been built on a lie. Melissa continued quietly. I debated calling you. Why now? Because I resigned yesterday. After what I've seen, I couldn't stay there anymore. I gripped the phone tighter. What did you see? She lowered her voice. They weren't hiding it. They'd leave work together, travel together. Everyone in the office knew. My vision blurred. Everyone? Almost everyone. So I was the only person who didn't know? I'm afraid so. Those words hurt in a way I can't fully explain. Being cheated on is devastating. Finding out everyone else knew first, that's humiliation. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was public. I had unknowingly become the woman everyone pitied behind her back. Melissa sighed. Mrs. Carter, I have something else. I closed my eyes. I'm not sure my heart can take anything else. I'm sorry. But Ashley isn't who Richard thinks she is. That caught my attention. What do you mean? I've seen her. She talks about him differently when he's not around. How? Like, she searched for the words. Like he's temporary. I frowned. I don't understand. She jokes with her friends. She calls him, Melissa hesitated. What? The retirement plan. Silence. My husband? Yes. She laughs about how easy older men are. No. I'm sorry. She says they're lonely. They're desperate to feel young again. And they'll spend anything if you flatter them. My hands started shaking. Part of me wanted to hang up. Not because I didn't believe her, because I did. Every sentence suddenly fit. Ashley hadn't fallen in love. She'd made an investment. Melissa continued. I know this isn't my place, but I watched you come to company events. You looked at Richard like he was your entire world. You deserved better. Tears rolled down my face again. Not because of Richard, because a stranger had shown me more compassion than my husband had. Before hanging up, Melissa said one final thing. Be careful. Why? I think Richard is moving money. My stomach dropped. What? I don't know how much, but accounts are changing. Assets are disappearing. I don't know if it's legal, but I thought you should know. The call ended. I sat motionless for almost an hour. Murphy rested his head on my knee. Rain tapped softly against the windows. My marriage hadn't just ended. It had been dismantled piece by piece long before I ever noticed. Richard hadn't suddenly changed. He'd simply become someone I no longer recognized. That evening, Daniel came over after work. The moment he walked inside, he knew something had happened. What is it? I handed him a cup of coffee. Then I told him everything. About Melissa. About the affair lasting 2 years. About Ashley. About the money. He stared at me in disbelief. I'll kill him. No. I mean it. No. He lied to all of us. I know. He made us look like fools. I know. Daniel stood up and paced the room, then suddenly stopped. Mom, what? Remember when Dad suddenly wanted separate bank accounts last year? I froze. Yes. He said it was for retirement planning. Daniel shook his head. It wasn't. That night, we pulled out old financial records. For the first time in 32 years, I looked carefully. Small withdrawals, transfers, accounts I'd never questioned, because I trusted him. Trust has a dangerous side. It keeps you from asking the questions you should ask. Rebecca arrived the next morning. Within 2 hours, all three of us were sitting around my dining table, surrounded by paperwork. My children weren't trying to save the marriage anymore. They were trying to protect me. Daniel circled one transaction. Mom, what? This account. What about it? It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to Dad either. I looked closer. A name appeared beneath the transfer. Ashley Morgan. Thousands of dollars. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. My heart sank. He hadn't just given another woman his love, he'd been giving her our future. Rebecca covered her mouth. Oh my God. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He used family money. I whispered, our retirement. No one spoke. We all understood what that meant. 32 years of sacrifice, vacations we skipped, cars we didn't buy, clothes we didn't replace. The overtime Richard worked, the promotions, the savings, everything we'd built together had quietly begun flowing into another woman's life. That evening, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sun disappear. For the first time since Richard left, I wasn't crying. Not because I felt better, because something had changed. The sadness was slowly making room for something else. Not hatred, clarity. I finally understood. The man I was grieving no longer existed. Maybe he hadn't existed for a very long time. I wasn't mourning my husband anymore. I was mourning the memory of the man I thought he had been, and somewhere across town, Richard still believed Ashley loved him. He had no idea. The woman he'd destroyed his family for was already planning her own escape. And when that moment came, he would discover a kind of loneliness far worse than the one he had tried so desperately to outrun. There comes a moment after betrayal when you wake up and realize you've spent more time waiting than living. I didn't notice when it happened. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a sunrise that suddenly healed me. No inspirational speech, no miracle. It happened one ordinary Tuesday morning, exactly 37 days after Richard left. I walked into the kitchen, poured 2 cups of coffee, and stared at the second mug. For weeks, I'd been doing it automatically, every morning, without thinking. I looked at that untouched cup. I walked over to the sink, poured it out, then quietly said, "You're not coming back." For the first time, those words didn't make me cry. They simply sounded true. That afternoon, I opened every curtain in the house. For weeks, I'd kept them closed. The rooms had become dark, heavy, almost like they were grieving with me. Sunlight rushed across the hardwood floors. I stood in the middle of the living room, watching dust dance through the air. Funny. The house suddenly looked bigger, not emptier, just bigger, as though life had quietly whispered, "You still have room to begin again." Murphy barked excitedly near the front door. His leash hung exactly where it always had. I realized something. Richard had promised to take him. He never came back. Murphy hadn't been abandoned. He'd been chosen, just like me. I clipped on his leash. "What do you think? Should we go for a walk?" His tail answered before I finished the sentence. The neighborhood looked different. Or maybe I did. Mrs. Jenkins waved from across the street. "Morning, Evelyn." For weeks, I'd avoided everyone. Today, I smiled. Morning. She crossed the road carrying a basket of tomatoes from her garden. "I've got too many." "You sure? If you don't take them, they'll spoil." I laughed softly. "I suppose Murphy and I can help." She smiled. "I'm glad to see you outside." It was such a simple sentence, yet somehow it reminded me how long I'd been hiding. That evening, I found my old paint box. It sat untouched in the hall closet, covered in dust. Richard used to tease me. "You'll never finish that painting." "I don't have time." I'd always answer. There was always something more important. Children, bills, laundry, dinner, his overtime, his meetings, his dreams. Somewhere along the way, mine quietly disappeared. I opened the box. The paint had dried. The brushes were stiff. But one small watercolor set still worked. I smiled. Good enough. The next morning, I drove to the craft store. The young cashier looked at my basket. Canvas, brushes, paint. "You an artist?" I laughed. "I used to think I might be." She smiled. "Then maybe you still are." Funny how strangers sometimes say exactly what your heart needs. My first painting was terrible. Absolutely terrible. The trees looked crooked. The sky looked muddy. Murphy somehow resembled a sheep. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. Not because the painting was good, because I had forgotten what it felt like to do something badly, simply because it brought me joy. No one was grading me. No one needed dinner first. No one expected perfection. For the first time in decades, I wasn't taking care of anyone else. I was simply living. A week later, Rebecca stopped by unexpectedly. She walked into the kitchen, stopped. I looked around. You moved the furniture. I did. The house looks, she searched for the word, lighter. I smiled. So do you. She looked toward the dining room. Richard's giant china cabinet Richard insisted on keeping for years was gone. You sold it? I donated it. What? I never liked it. She blinked. You hated that cabinet. I know. So why did we keep it? Because your father loved it. She stared at me, then slowly smiled. I don't think I've ever seen you choose yourself. Neither had I. Every room became a small act of freedom. The heavy curtains disappeared. The dark brown walls became soft cream. I planted lavender where Richard wanted hedges. I bought yellow pillows. He hated yellow. I loved yellow. Who knew? Apparently, I hadn't. One Saturday, I attended a community art class. Walking inside felt terrifying. Everyone seemed younger, more talented, more confident. I almost turned around. Then an older woman called out, "First time?" I nodded. So was mine. She smiled warmly. "I'm Gloria. I'm Evelyn." She patted the chair beside her. "Sit." That single invitation changed everything. Gloria became my first new friend in years. Not Richard's friend. Not another couple from church. Mine. Every Thursday, we painted together. Sometimes we painted. Sometimes we simply talked. She'd been widowed 12 years earlier. I thought my life ended when Frank died, she told me. It didn't. It just became different. Different. Not worse. Different. I held on to that word. One afternoon after class, Gloria asked, "Have you thought about traveling?" I laughed. "With what money?" "You'd be surprised." She pulled out a brochure. Senior bus tours through the Blue Ridge Mountains, small cabins, art retreats, garden festivals. I smiled. Richard always hated traveling unless it involved golf. I wanted museums, gardens, historic towns. We compromised for 32 years, which usually meant we did what he wanted. Now, there was no compromise, only possibility. As the weeks passed, people started saying something strange. "You look different." Not younger, not prettier, different. At first, I thought they meant my haircut or my clothes. Then Gloria explained, "No, you've started looking people in the eyes again." I hadn't even realized I'd stopped. One afternoon, I received an email. The local community center planned an art exhibition. Anyone could submit work. I laughed. "My paintings?" Gloria nodded. "Why not?" "They're amateur." "So?" "They're not good." She smiled. "Who decides?" I thought about it all night. Finally, I submitted one. Not because I expected to win, because 6 weeks earlier, I never would have believed I was capable of trying. Then something happened. Something I never expected. The phone rang. It was Daniel. "Mom, are you busy?" "No, I just saw Dad." My stomach tightened. "Oh?" "He looks," Daniel paused, "different." "How?" "I don't know. Tired, older. He asked about you." I looked out the window. "What did you tell him?" Daniel smiled softly. "I told him you were busy." "Busy doing what?" "Living." I laughed. The first real laugh in a long time. That night, for the first time since Richard left, I didn't think about Ashley. I didn't think about the affair. I didn't think about divorce. I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset. Murphy is sleeping beside my chair, a paintbrush still stained blue resting in my hand. And I realized something. For 32 years, I had built my identity around being someone's wife. When Richard walked away, I thought he'd taken my life with him. He hadn't. He had only taken the role I'd been playing. The woman underneath, I was still here. She had simply been waiting for someone to finally choose her. Little did I know, across town, Richard's perfect new life was beginning to collapse. And before another month had passed, the man who once walked away without looking back would be standing on my front porch, looking like someone I barely recognized. Exactly 3 months after Richard left, I stopped counting the days. Not because I'd forgotten him, because I finally understood something. Healing doesn't begin when the pain disappears. It begins when your life becomes more interesting than your heartbreak. That Tuesday morning, I was in my backyard painting the roses, not the flowers themselves, the light, the way the morning sun settled across the petals. I had become fascinated with ordinary things: birds, rain, coffee, quiet. For 32 years, I had rushed through mornings trying to make someone else's life easier. Now, for the first time, I actually noticed them. Murphy lay asleep beside my chair. The radio played softly through the kitchen window. Everything felt peaceful. Not perfect, just peaceful. Something I hadn't felt in years. Rebecca called around lunchtime. "Mom, how's my favorite artist?" I laughed. "I've only sold one painting." "Exactly. You're officially a professional." We talked about nothing important: her children, the weather, my tomatoes. Then she casually asked, "Have you heard anything about Dad?" I hadn't. Not in weeks. "No." She hesitated. "I have." I set my paintbrush down. "Oh?" "He called Sunday." "What did he want?" "Nothing. He just—" She searched for the words. "He sounded strange." "Strange how?" "Lonely." I looked across the yard. Funny, loneliness had a way of finding the people who created it. That afternoon, Gloria invited me to lunch. We sat outside a small cafe downtown. She stirred her tea. "You've changed." "I hope that's a compliment." "It is. You smile with your eyes now." I laughed. "I didn't know there was a difference." "There is. For a while, you smiled because you were trying to convince everyone you were okay. And now?" "Now, you smile because sometimes you actually are." I looked down at my coffee. She was right. There were still difficult mornings. There were still nights I reached for the empty side of the bed. But those moments were becoming fewer. Without realizing it, I had started building a life that no longer depended on Richard returning. Later that week, Daniel stopped by after work. He carried 2 pizzas. I figured artists forget to eat. I do not. "You absolutely do." We laughed. As we sat on the porch, he looked unusually serious. I ran into Dad. I looked at him. "How is he?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. "He looks older." 3 months? "He looks like 3 years old." That surprised me. Richard had always been meticulous. Perfectly pressed shirts, hair trimmed every other Saturday, shoes polished. Daniel shook his head. He wasn't himself. "What happened?" "He asked about you." I smiled sadly. "I'm sure he did." "No. You don't understand." Daniel leaned forward. He asked if you're seeing anyone. I blinked. "What?" I told him no. He looked relieved. Relieved? That didn't make sense. Richard had chosen another life. Why would my life matter now? Then Daniel said something unexpected. He asked if you're happy. I looked toward the sunset. "What did you tell him?" Daniel smiled. I said, "My mother finally laughs again." I didn't know what to say, because somehow that answer felt more important than anything else. The following Monday, I received a letter, not from Richard, from my lawyer. The divorce would be finalized within 3 weeks. I sat quietly reading every page. Surprisingly, I didn't cry. I simply signed where they told me to sign. Sometimes acceptance arrives so quietly, you don't even notice it. That evening, I found our wedding album. It had been sitting untouched inside the hallway closet. I carried it into the living room. Murphy climbed onto the sofa beside me. Page after page. 2 young people. I'm 29 years old, completely convinced love alone could solve everything. I smiled, not bitterly, tenderly. Those two people had been real. Richard had loved me once. I believed that. Maybe not at the end, but certainly in the beginning. That thought somehow brought me peace. Not every beautiful thing lasts forever. It doesn't mean it wasn't beautiful. The next morning, I was repainting the front porch railing. Old clothes, hair tied back, paint across my hands. Definitely not how I imagined I'd spend retirement. But I was happy. Murphy suddenly stood, his ears perked up. Then he barked, not excited, curious. I looked toward the driveway. A black pickup truck slowly pulled in. My heart stopped. I knew that truck. I had ridden in it for 12 years. Richard stepped out. For a second, I genuinely didn't recognize him. He looked smaller. Not physically, emotionally. His shoulders slumped. His hair was more gray than I remembered. His beard hadn't been shaved properly. The confident man who had walked out of my house 3 months earlier was gone. He stood beside the truck for several seconds, almost like he wasn't sure he deserved to come any closer. Murphy barked again. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of growling, Murphy ran toward him, tail wagging. Dogs forgive much faster than people. Richard knelt down, wrapped his arms around Murphy. I watched tears fill his eyes. Even from the porch, I could see them. He whispered something into Murphy's fur. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew they weren't meant for the dog. Finally, he looked up at me. Neither of us spoke. 3 months, 32 years, thousands of memories, and suddenly we were strangers, standing in the same driveway. He slowly walked toward the porch. Every step looked heavy, like each one required permission. I remained where I was, paintbrush still in my hand. When he reached the bottom step, he stopped, didn't climb, didn't assume, didn't smile. He simply looked at me. Evelyn. His voice sounded different, hoarse, fragile, almost frightened. I waited. He swallowed hard. I know I don't deserve this. A long pause. But, can we talk? The words hung between us. 3 months earlier, I would have done anything to hear them. Now, I wasn't sure. I looked at him carefully, really looked. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. His wedding ring was gone. His shirt was wrinkled. Even his hand shook slightly. This wasn't the man who had confidently declared, "I deserve to be happy." This was someone else, someone carrying a weight I couldn't yet see. I finally spoke. What happened? He lowered his head, then quietly answered, "Everything." Silence settled over the porch. The breeze gently moved the wind chimes Richard had built years ago. He stared at the wooden floorboards, unable to meet my eyes. Finally, he whispered the words I never expected to hear. "She left me." I said nothing. He continued. I thought I knew what love looked like." His voice cracked. I was wrong. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he slowly looked up. His eyes filled with tears, and asked the question that would decide both of our futures. "Evelyn, is there any chance you could ever forgive me?" I looked at Richard for what felt like the first time in months. Not the Richard I'd spent 32 years with. Not the man who walked out carrying a suitcase. Not the husband who calmly said, "I deserve to be happy." This man looked defeated. His shoulders sagged beneath a wrinkled blue shirt. His eyes were swollen from lack of sleep. Even the confidence in his voice had disappeared. 3 months earlier, he'd stood in the same driveway, convinced he was beginning the best chapter of his life. Now, he looked like a man who had lost everything. I still didn't invite him inside. Instead, I pointed toward the porch swing. "We can talk here." He nodded. "Thank you." Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. The old porch swing creaked softly beneath our weight. Murphy lay between us, his head resting on Richard's shoe. Dogs don't understand pride. They simply love. Sometimes I wished people were more like dogs. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "I don't know where to begin." I looked toward the yard. "Start with the truth." He nodded slowly. For once. He took a deep breath. "Ashley left. I know. His head turned quickly. You know? I assumed. He frowned. You assumed? I smiled sadly. Richard. A relationship built on betrayal usually doesn't become a fairy tale. He lowered his eyes. You were right. I wasn't trying to be. For a long time, he simply stared across the garden. Then he quietly said, She never loved me. Those words didn't bring satisfaction, only sadness, because somewhere inside, I remembered the man who once believed I was his entire world. She loved what I could buy. His voice cracked. The vacations, the apartment, the jewelry, the dinners, the attention. I remained silent. He continued. The moment I told her I needed to slow down financially, everything changed. He laughed bitterly. You know what she actually said? I shook my head. She looked at me and said, Richard, I thought you had more money than this. The sentence hung in the air. I spent months believing I was the luckiest man alive. He smiled without humor. Turns out I was just an aging man with a wallet. I listened quietly, not because I enjoyed hearing him suffer, because for the first time in months, he wasn't defending himself. He wasn't making excuses. He was finally telling the truth. I sold my truck. I blinked. What? I couldn't afford the apartment anymore. You sold your truck? He nodded. The one I loved. I remembered. That truck had been his pride. He polished it every Saturday morning. He once joked he'd keep it forever. Now it is gone. Funny, the things we think we'll never lose. He rubbed his face. I've made so many mistakes. I still didn't answer. He looked toward me. Evelyn, I owe you an apology. I folded my hands. You owe me much more than that. He nodded immediately. I know. His eyes wandered across the house. You painted? Yes. The porch used to be brown. I wanted blue. He smiled faintly. You always wanted blue. I know. Why didn't we ever paint it? I looked at him. Because you preferred brown. He closed his eyes. That simple sentence seemed to hurt him more than any accusation. I've been thinking, he whispered. For the first time in my life, I almost smiled. That's a dangerous hobby. He laughed softly, then it became serious again. I spent 32 years believing I carried this family. I stayed quiet. But after I left, I realized something. He looked directly into my eyes. I didn't build this home. You did. I felt something tighten inside my chest. Not forgiveness. Recognition. I walked into an empty apartment every night, he continued. No family pictures, no smell of dinner, no dog waiting, no grandchildren dropping by, no birthday cards taped to the refrigerator, nothing. He swallowed hard. I thought freedom would feel exciting. What did it feel like? He answered immediately. Expensive. That surprised me. He smiled bitterly. I confused excitement with happiness. I confused attention with love. I confused youth with peace. Silence settled again. The wind gently moved through the garden. For years, I'd imagined this conversation. In every version, I thought I'd be angry. Instead, I mostly felt tired. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out something small, carefully placed it on the table between us. My wedding ring. I stared at it. I couldn't keep wearing it, he whispered. Not after what I'd done. I looked at the ring. 32 years, reduced to a small circle of gold. I kept it, he said quietly, because I couldn't throw away 32 years. I looked up. But you walked away from them, he nodded. I know. For the first time, tears rolled down his face. Not dramatic crying, quiet tears. The kind older men often try to hide. I don't expect you to understand. I don't. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't. I don't expect anything. Another pause. I needed you to know I was wrong. That sentence echoed inside me, because for 3 months I'd waited to hear it. I'd imagined it would heal something. It didn't. Some apologies arrive after the wound has already become a scar. He looked toward my paintings stacked near the porch door. You painted those? Yes. They're beautiful. I smiled. No, they're improving. He laughed. You always were honest. I learned from marriage. For the first time, the conversation felt almost familiar. Not romantic, not hopeful, just two people who had once known each other better than anyone else. Then he asked quietly, Are you happy? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked across my backyard. The roses. Murphy is sleeping peacefully, fresh paint drying on the fence. My easel is standing beneath the oak tree. Finally, I smiled. I have peaceful days. He nodded. I miss peace. He stood slowly. I should go. I nodded. Neither of us moved. Then he asked the question he'd clearly been carrying since arriving. Evelyn, if... He struggled to find the words. If I asked, would you ever... He stopped. I finished the sentence for him. Come back? His silence answered. I looked at him carefully. The man standing before me wasn't evil. He wasn't a monster. He was simply a man who had mistaken temporary excitement for lasting love. A mistake that cost him everything. I felt genuine compassion for him, but compassion is not the same as trust. I quietly stood. I walked to the porch railing, rested my hands against the wood. For several seconds, I said nothing. Finally, without turning around, I whispered, Richard, I've already decided. The air became completely still. He waited. So did I, because I knew the next words I spoke would close one chapter forever and begin another. I've already decided. Richard stood perfectly still. The hopeful expression that had quietly begun to return to his face disappeared. I turned slowly to look at him. 32 years, one lifetime, thousands of ordinary days, countless memories. How do you summarize a marriage in a single answer? You don't. You simply tell the truth. Richard searched my face. I'll do anything. His voice trembled. I know. I'll go to counseling. I know. I'll sell everything. I know. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. I nodded gently. I believe you. For just a second, hope returned to his eyes. Then I quietly said, But that doesn't change my answer. He lowered his head. So, it's over. I took a slow breath. Our marriage ended 3 months ago. He closed his eyes. I know. No. I shook my head softly. You don't. He looked at me again. The marriage didn't end the day you walked away. It ended the first time you looked another woman in the eyes and chose to protect that secret instead of protecting us. Silence. You ended it every time you came home and lied. Every anniversary, every holiday, every Sunday sitting beside me in church. Every kiss you gave me while loving someone else. His shoulders began to shake. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was finally refusing to protect him from the truth. He whispered, I hate myself. I believed him. I know. I don't recognize the man I became. I know. I don't know why I threw everything away. I looked at him quietly. I do. He frowned. You stopped being grateful. The words landed heavily. You spent so many years chasing what you didn't have that you forgot the value of what you already did. He looked around the yard, the roses, the freshly painted fence, the blue porch. I didn't even notice. What? How much of yourself you gave away? I smiled sadly. Neither did I. He sat back down on the porch swing. I've replayed that night 1,000 times, the night I left. I keep asking myself, what if I'd stayed? I nodded. I've asked myself the same question. His eyes lifted. You have? Yes. What answer did you find? I looked across the garden. If you had stayed, but your heart was still somewhere else, I'd still have lost you. The wind stirred the lavender along the walkway. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Richard quietly asked, Did you ever hate me? I thought carefully. No. He looked surprised. I hated what you chose. I hated the lies. I hated the humiliation. But hate, I smiled softly. Hate would kept me connected to you. I wanted to be free. He wiped his face. I wasn't thinking. No, you were. He looked confused. You thought about yourself, only yourself. You thought about feeling young. You thought about excitement. You thought about attention. You simply stopped thinking about everyone who loved you. His head dropped again. I know. I walked toward the flower bed, carefully trimmed one of the roses. I held it between my fingers. Do you remember planting these? He smiled through tears. Our 10th anniversary. You insisted roses were impossible to keep alive. You proved me wrong. He laughed quietly. You proved me wrong. I looked at the bloom. Marriage is like these roses. They don't stay beautiful because you admire them. They stay beautiful because someone keeps caring for them. They're watered, protected, pruned, chosen. Every single day. I looked back at him. You stopped watering ours. His tears came freely now. I don't deserve another chance. No, I know. He struggled to speak. I miss my family. I know. I miss hearing the grandchildren laugh. I know. I miss Sunday dinners. I know. I miss watching you fall asleep during movies. I smiled despite myself. I never stayed awake. You never did. For a moment, we both laughed. Then the silence returned. Richard reached into his wallet, pulled out a faded photograph. It was us, 20 years younger, standing on the beach. Rebecca had taken the picture. I carried this every day, he whispered. I looked at it after Ashley left. I finally realized the happiest version of me was standing beside you. I looked at the picture, then handed it back. You should keep it. You don't want it? I don't need photographs to remember. I lived it. He stared at me. I thought you'd scream. I thought you'd throw me off the porch. I laughed softly. I'm 63. I don't have that kind of energy. He laughed too. The sound felt strangely familiar. Then I became serious again. Besides, I've spent too much of my life carrying your mistakes. I'm not carrying your guilt too. Those words seemed to surprise even me, because they were true. For months, I'd blamed myself. Was I too old, too tired, too ordinary? Now I finally understood. Someone else's betrayal is never proof that you weren't enough. Sometimes it's proof that they never appreciated what they already had. Richard stood. I don't know what will happen now. I nodded. I do. He waited. You go home. I'm staying here. You rebuild your life. I will continue building mine. He swallowed hard. And that's it? I smiled gently. No. That's the beginning. He looked confused. The beginning? Of living honestly. No pretending. No lies. No secret lives. No blaming other people for your choices. You finally become the man I spent 32 years believing you already were. He closed his eyes. I hope I can. I hope so too. He stepped toward me, very slowly. So, this is goodbye. I looked at him for a long moment, then quietly said, no. He frowned. This isn't goodbye, it's acceptance. Our story happened. It mattered. It shaped us. I'm not going to pretend those 32 years meant nothing. They gave me 2 beautiful children. They gave me grandchildren. They gave me memories I'll always treasure. But I paused. They also ended, and endings deserve honesty. Without thinking, he reached out, not to hold me, simply to shake my hand. I looked at it, then smiled. After 32 years of marriage, a handshake felt almost funny. Instead, I stepped forward and hugged him. Not the hug of a wife welcoming her husband home. The hug of someone releasing the last weight she had been carrying. He cried against my shoulder. I'm sorry. I know. I'll regret this for the rest of my life. I know. I truly loved you. I closed my eyes. I know. He stepped back, tears still run down his face. Then he turned, walked toward his truck, stopped halfway, and looked back one last time. I hope, he whispered. "I hope one day you'll remember the good version of me." I smiled. "I already do." He nodded, got into the truck, and drove away. I stood on the porch until he disappeared around the corner. Surprisingly, I wasn't crying, because this time he wasn't leaving me. He was simply leaving. And there was a difference. As I turned back toward the house, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Gloria. "Congratulations." I frowned. Congratulations? For what? Then I opened the next message. A photograph. My painting. Hanging inside the community art gallery. Beneath it, a small red sticker. Sold. At that exact moment, I realized something beautiful. The chapter Richard had closed had quietly become the chapter where I finally discovered who I was without him. After Richard drove away, I stood on the porch for a long time, not because I wanted him to come back, because I was surprised by how calm I felt. 3 months earlier, I had begged God to save my marriage. Now, I found myself thanking him for saving me. I walked back into the house. The same house where I'd cried until sunrise. The same kitchen where divorce papers once covered the table. The same living room where Richard had calmly said, "I'm leaving." Nothing about the house had changed, but everything about me had. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like someone had abandoned me. I felt like someone had underestimated me. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, not because anxiety dragged me out of bed, because I was excited. Excited. I hadn't used that word about my own life in years. Today was the opening weekend of the community art exhibition, the same exhibition where one of my paintings was sold. I still couldn't quite believe it. Someone, a complete stranger, had looked at something I'd created and decided it deserved a place in their home. For years, I'd measured my worth by how well I took care of everyone else. Now, for the first time, someone appreciated something that belonged only to me. Gloria met me outside the gallery. She hugged me tightly. "I told you. You did. I also told you your paintings were beautiful." "You exaggerated." She laughed. "No. You just spent 32 years listening to someone who stopped noticing you." Her words stayed with me all day. Sometimes the problem isn't that you've lost your value. It's that you've been standing in front of someone who stopped looking. As we walked through the gallery, I noticed people standing in front of my painting, not walking past it, standing, looking. One older gentleman leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I love the way she painted the morning light." Morning light. He didn't know. That painting wasn't about flowers. It was about hope. About the first morning I believed I could survive without Richard. He saw beauty. I remembered healing. Both were true. The gallery owner approached me. "Evelyn, yes? I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "Your work brought people into the room." I laughed softly. "I've only sold one painting." She smiled. "You've sold 3. I blinked. "What?" She handed me 3 small red stickers. Each one represented another sale. I stared at them, then at the paintings, then back at her. "I don't understand." She smiled warmly. "People connect with honesty." That sentence echoed in my mind. People connect with honesty. Not perfection, not youth, not expensive clothes, not pretending. Honesty. Funny. Richard spent 2 years building a fake life. I spent 3 months becoming my real self. Guess which one lasted? A week later, Rebecca invited everyone to dinner. Nothing fancy, just family. Daniel arrived first, then the grandchildren, the house filled with laughter. Toy cars rolled across the floor. Someone spilled juice, the baby cried. Everyone talked at once, complete chaos, beautiful chaos. Halfway through dinner, Rebecca raised her glass. "I have a toast." Everyone became quiet. "To Mom," I smiled. "What did I do?" She looked around the table. "You reminded all of us that life doesn't end when someone walks away. It begins when you stop walking away from yourself." I felt tears gathering. Daniel lifted his glass too. To Mom, the strongest person I know. Even the grandchildren copied us, holding up plastic cups. No one mentioned Richard. Not because we'd forgotten him, because this evening wasn't about loss anymore. It was about everything that remained. Later that night, the phone rang. Richard. I stared at his name. For a second, I considered letting it ring. Instead, I answered, "Hello, Evelyn." His voice sounded steadier than before. "How are you?" I smiled. "I'm good. You sound," he paused, "happy." "I am." Silence. Then, "I'm glad." And somehow I believed him. Not because he wanted me back, because for the first time, he wanted something good for me, even if it no longer included him. "I heard about your paintings." I laughed. "News travels fast. Rebecca told me." Another pause. "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words would have meant everything 6 months earlier. Now, they simply felt kind. "Thank you. I mean it. I know." "I've been thinking." He hesitated. "I spent years believing I was the one making sacrifices, but I never saw yours. You gave up on promotions. You gave up traveling. You gave up painting. You gave up pieces of yourself, so our family could have everything." He took a slow breath. "I don't know if I've ever really thanked you." I closed my eyes. "You just did." Before hanging up, he quietly said, "I've started volunteering." That surprised me. "Where?" "A food pantry." I needed to stop thinking about myself. I smiled. "How's it going?" He laughed softly. "I'm learning. I'm not very good. No one is on the first day." Another silence. Then he whispered, "I hope I become someone better than the man who left you." I looked out at the moonlight falling across my garden. I hope so too. As the seasons changed, life kept moving. Not rushing, just moving. I painted, traveling, read books I'd ignored for years. I joined a gardening club, started teaching watercolor classes every Saturday morning. One afternoon, a woman stayed after class. She looked nervous. "My husband left 6 months ago." I nodded quietly. "I don't know who I am anymore." I smiled. I said those exact words. She looked surprised. "What happened?" I handed her a paintbrush. I remembered. That became my favorite part of every week. Not painting. Watching people slowly believe in themselves again. I realized something beautiful. The broken pieces of my life had become someone else's hope. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting your pain. Using it to help someone else carry theirs. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a white envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, it was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard's. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The first line simply read, "Thank you for loving me longer than I deserved." I read the entire letter twice, then folded it carefully. I placed it inside my journal, not because I wanted him back, because of gratitude. Even late gratitude still deserves a place to rest. I thought that letter would be the final chapter of our story. I was wrong, because 1 year later, our family would gather again, not for a wedding, not for a funeral, but for a moment that would prove some endings don't destroy a family. They teach it, how to become honest again. People often ask me, what happened to Richard? I always smile before answering, because they usually expect one of 2 endings. Either, he came home and we lived happily ever after, or, I spent the rest of my life hating him. Life is almost never that simple. The truth is, both of us had to learn how to live with the consequences of one decision, just in very different ways. 1 year later, our granddaughter Emma graduated from high school. It was the first major family gathering since the divorce became final. Rebecca had called weeks earlier. "Mom, I need to ask you something." "What is it?" "I'm inviting Dad." I smiled. "I assumed you would." She hesitated. "Are you okay with that?" I looked around my little art studio. Sunlight poured through the windows. Paintings lined every wall. Fresh flowers sat beside the easel. I realized that question would have destroyed me a year earlier. Now it barely disturbed my peace. Of course, I don't want Emma worrying about us. Rebecca let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. Thank you. No, I laughed softly. Thank you for asking. Graduation day arrived on a warm Saturday morning. I wore a soft blue dress, the same color I'd painted my porch. Funny, blue used to remind me of sadness. Now, it reminded me of peace. I arrived early, not because I wanted the best seat, because old habits die slowly. I'd spent 32 years arriving early for everyone else. Some habits are worth keeping. Families slowly filled the auditorium. Children ran through the aisles. Grandparents adjusted cameras. Parents searched for good seats. Life looked wonderfully ordinary. Then I saw Richard, standing near the entrance. He looked healthier than he had a year earlier. Still older, still quieter, but healthier. He noticed me. Our eyes met. He didn't hesitate. He walked over. Not with confidence, with respect. Good morning, Evelyn. Good morning. You look wonderful. So do you. He smiled. I've been volunteering every Saturday. I heard. Rebecca told you? No. The newspaper. His eyes widened. You saw that? I nodded. A local paper had featured volunteers from the community food pantry. There he was. Hair grayer, smile smaller, but genuine. For the first time in a long while, he looked like a man trying to become useful instead of impressive. He reached into his jacket pocket. I brought something. He handed me a folded newspaper clipping. It wasn't about him. It was about me. The headline read, "Local artist raises thousands for women starting over." My recent art exhibition had donated every dollar to a shelter for women rebuilding their lives after divorce and domestic abuse. He looked at me quietly. I'm proud of you. This time, those words felt different. Not because I needed them, because they were finally spoken without expectation. No hidden agenda, no request, no manipulation, just pride. I smiled. Thank you. Emma spotted us before the ceremony began. She hurried over in her graduation gown. Grandma! She wrapped both arms around me, then hugged Richard. I'm so happy both of you came. I looked at her smiling face. She had no idea what a miracle that simple sentence really was. Not because Richard and I had reconciled, because bitterness hadn't won. During the ceremony, I found myself thinking less about the past and more about the future. Emma would leave for college in the fall. Daniel's youngest son had started kindergarten. Rebecca had accepted a promotion she'd been afraid to pursue. Life had continued. Not perfectly, but beautifully. After graduation, everyone gathered outside beneath the old oak trees. Photos, laughter, cake, children running through the grass. Rebecca pulled out her phone. Family picture. We all gathered together. Then she looked at me, I looked at Richard, and quietly asked, "You two stand together." For one brief second, the world seemed to pause. Richard immediately shook his head. Only if Evelyn wants to. Everyone looked toward me. I smiled. Of course. We stood beside each other. Not husband and wife. Not lovers. Not enemies. Simply two people who once built a family together. The photographer counted. 1, 2, 3. Flash. The picture captured something I'd never expected. Not reconciliation. Acceptance. Later that afternoon, Richard walked beside me toward the parking lot. I wanted to tell you something. I waited. I sold the lake cabin. I looked surprised. You loved that place. I did. What changed? I donated most of the money. To what? He smiled. The scholarship fund at the community college. I blinked. In your name. I stopped walking. What? He nodded. It's called the Evelyn Carter Second Chance Scholarship. I stared at him. You shouldn't have. I know, but I wanted to. He smiled gently. You spent 32 years helping one stubborn man build a better life. I thought maybe your name should help a few more people. My eyes filled with tears. Not because I wanted him back, because people, even broken people, can still choose to become better. Before we reached our cars, he stopped one last time. You know, I used to think leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I looked at him. What do you think now? He smiled sadly. No, leaving wasn't the biggest mistake. What was it? Not appreciating you while I still had the chance. Neither of us spoke. Some truths don't need an answer. As he drove away, I realized something. For months, I believed my story was about betrayal. It wasn't. It was about identity. Richard leaving didn't destroy my life. It exposed how much of myself I'd quietly abandoned over the years. I had spent decades becoming Richard's wife, Rebecca's mother, Daniel's mother, Emma's grandmother. Every role mattered, but somewhere underneath all of them, there had always been Evelyn, the little girl who loved to paint, the young woman who dreamed of seeing the mountains, the person who laughed too loudly during old movies. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply waited, patiently, for someone to remember her. That someone, it turned out to be me. Today, when I unlock my art studio every morning, the first thing people notice is a small wooden sign hanging above the door. Many ask why I chose those particular words. I always smile, because they aren't mine. They're something my grandmother used to tell me whenever life disappointed her. The sign simply says, "Never confuse an ending with the end." For a long time, I thought Richard leaving was the end of my happiness. It wasn't. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. That introduced me to the woman I'd forgotten to become. If you're listening today and someone has walked away from your life, please remember this. Never beg someone to stay where they no longer choose to be. Instead, choose yourself. Not out of pride, not out of revenge, but because of your life has always been worth living, even if someone else failed to see its value. Sometimes, the greatest love story, it isn't about finding someone who never leaves. It's about finding yourself after someone does, and looking back one day with peace in your heart, knowing you survived the chapter you once believed would destroy you. You didn't just survive it, you became someone stronger, kinder, and more completely yourself because of it. If this story touched your heart, I want to ask you one simple question. Have you ever spent years loving someone only to realize you had forgotten how to love yourself? Sometimes the people who walk away from us don't destroy our lives. They simply force us to discover the strength we never knew we had. If this story reminded you that your worth is never defined by someone else's choices, leave a heart in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts. And if you enjoy emotional stories about love, family, betrayal, forgiveness, and finding the courage to begin again, please subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more stories waiting to be told. Until next time, never let someone else's decision convince you that your story is over. Sometimes the chapter that hurts the most becomes the one that saves your life.